Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Reflection, where we explore the Qur'an through Tafsir al-Mīzān and where ʿAllāmah Muḥammad Ḥusayn Ṭabāṭabāqqī restores belief to something the modern mind desperately needs: coherence, trust, and certainty. There is a question many believers carry, sometimes quietly, sometimes anxiously. If prophets are human, can they truly be free of sin? How can divine guidance remain pure if it is carried by fallible messengers? What does it mean to lead by example, not only in speech but in conduct? And why is the concept of Ismah, infallibility, essential for spiritual trust? These are not small or abstract questions, because what is at stake here is not merely moral excellence. What is at stake is the credibility of revelation itself. If a prophet can betray truth, then surrender becomes fragile. If the messenger is unreliable, guidance becomes a source of anxiety instead of refuge, and faith quietly shifts from certainty to suspicion. In this episode of Reflection, we will explore what Ismah, infallibility, truly means in the Quranic worldview and why it is not the denial of human freedom. Why divine guidance requires a morally reliable messenger, not merely accurate words. And how prophetic infallibility safeguards certainty, Yaqīn, and prevents faith from collapsing into doubt. And why prophets are not only teachers of truth, but living exemplars of how revelation is meant to be lived. To frame this discussion, the Qur'an gives an instruction that is striking in its simplicity and profound in what it assumes, as anchored in Surah Al-An'am, that is Surah number 6, verse number 90. فَبِهُدَاهُمْ مُقْتَدِهِ. So follow their guidance. Pause over that command. Allah is not only telling you to listen, Allah is telling you to follow. And al-Mīzān draws out what this command assumes. If Allah tells you to follow the prophets, then their guidance must be trustworthy, not only in what is said, but in how it is lived. Pause and reflect. When you imagine following a prophet as your model before Allah, do you need to trust only the message, or must you also trust the inner moral reality of the messenger? To understand prophetic infallibility properly, we must first remove a caricature. Many people assume Ismah means prophets are robotic beings, incapable of struggle, untouched by emotion, mechanically obedient. But that picture is neither Quranic nor reflective of how al-Mīzān explains infallibility. In Tafsir al-Mīzān, ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāqqī defines Ismah as divine protection through heightened awareness, not the removal of free will, but the perfection of moral sight. The Prophet is not prevented from choosing. Rather, his awareness of Allah is so complete that disobedience never becomes a genuine attraction. The Prophet remains human. His experience fatigues. He feels grief. He endures loneliness, hostility, and pain. But his relationship with Allah is so vivid and uninterrupted that sin appears ugly, not tempting. There is a difference between resisting temptation and no longer being seduced by it. Ismah belongs to the second category, and the Qur'an affirms this purity at the very heart of revelation in Surah An-Najm, that is Surah 53, verse 3 and 4. وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. He does not speak from desire. It is only a revelation revealed. This is not poetic praise. It is an epistemic guarantee. Allah is telling the believer, this guidance is not filtered through ego, not bent by personal desire, not compromised by self-interest. Reflect carefully. How does your understanding of moral possibility changes when you imagine a heart so harmonized with truth that sin feels repulsive rather than attractive? Prophethood cannot function without trust. If a prophet is sent to deliver God's commands and to demand obedience, then the entire relationship between God and the servant rests on one fundamental question. Can I trust this messenger? And trust cannot be partial. It cannot be, I trust the Qur'an but not the character. I accept the teaching but I'm unsure whether it is lived. Because the Qur'an does not permit this separation. It commands obedience to the messenger as part of obedience to Allah Himself, as anchored in Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4, verse 64. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. We did not send any messenger except that he should be obeyed by Allah's permission. If Allah commands obedience, that obedience must be intelligible. But obedience becomes unintelligible if the messenger is morally unreliable. This is why al-Mīzān treats Ismah not as an optional theological detail, but as a condition for guidance itself. Without infallibility, one of two things must happen. Either the believer loses trust and revelation collapses into doubt, or the believer accepts contradiction and religion collapses into irrationality. You see, Ismah protects coherence. It protects the integrity of revelation, and it protects the believer from spiritual confusion. Ask yourself honestly, when you follow someone's guidance, is your trust grounded only in what they say, or also in who they are when no one is watching? Ismah does not only protect trust, it protects certainty. Allah does not reveal guidance so that people live in permanent suspicion. Revelation is meant to produce Yaqīn, settled certainty. And al-Mīzān is super clear. Certainty depends on an unbroken epistemic chain, pure in transmission and pure in moral integrity, as anchored in Surah An-Nahl, Surah 16, verse 36. وَلَقَدْ بَأَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتِ. We sent into every nation a messenger saying worship Allah and avoid false gods. Prophets are epistemic anchors. Through them, Allah stabilizes truth in the world, who He is, what He commands, what is true, and what the human being is meant to become. Without Ismah, certainty erodes, worship becomes hesitant, and surrender becomes conditional. Reflect for a moment. Can lasting certainty survive if the source of divine guidance is morally unstable? A familiar objection arises. If prophets cannot sin, are they truly free? This rests on a misunderstanding of freedom. The ability to choose evil is not freedom, it's vulnerability. True freedom is the ability to choose truth without being enslaved by ego, as anchored in Surah Al-Anfal, Surah number 8, verse number 2. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. True believers are those whose heart tremble when Allah is mentioned. That trembling is moral awareness. Now imagine that awareness at its highest clarity. That is the prophet. Sin disappears not because prophets are forced, but because it no longer fits the heart. Pause and reflect. Have you ever turned away from something harmful, not out of fear, but because it felt wrong at your core? Prophets are not sent only to deliver words. They are sent to embody guidance. Allah does not merely teach truth. Allah shows what truth looks like when lived. This is clearly articulated in Surah Al-Ahzab, that is Surah number 33, verse 21. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, in the Messenger of Allah, you have an excellent example. The Prophet is a living Tafsir of revelation. Guidance is not merely a message to hear. It is a truth to walk behind. This understanding of infallibility is not a later philosophical construction, nor a speculative doctrine imposed upon the Qur'an. It is articulated directly and consistently in the teachings of the Imams, those who understood prophethood not as abstract theology, but as lived divine guidance. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi states with clarity and finality, Inna Allah azza wa jalla khassa anbiya'ahu bil-ʿIṣmah. Indeed, Allah mighty and exalted singled out His prophets with infallibility. This is not presented as a point of debate. It is presented as a premise of guidance. Because if Allah entrusts humanity with a messenger, that messenger must be worthy of complete trust, not occasionally, not publicly, but in the totality of his being. And Imam Ali deepens this understanding when he describes the prophet as being accompanied from early life by divine care and protection, refined, guarded, and directed long before revelation formally descended. وَلَقَدْ قَرَنَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ بِهِ مِنْ لَدُنْ أَنْ كَانَ فَطِيمًا أَعْظَمَ مَلِكٍ مِنْ مَلَائِكَتِي يَسْلُكُ بِهِ طَرِيقَ الْمَكَارِمِ وَمَحَاسِنَ أَخْلَاقِ الْعَالَمِ لَيْلَهُ وَنَهَارَهُ. Indeed, Allah, glorified be He, paired with the Prophet from the time he was weaned the greatest of his angels, guiding him constantly along the paths of nobility and the highest moral character by night and by day. This is not mere biography, and it is not sentimental praise. It is theology. It means that guidance is not left exposed to human instability. It means salvation is not entrusted to chance. And it means that when Allah commands you to follow a prophet, He has already secured the moral reliability of that path. So prophetic infallibility is not about elevating prophets beyond humanity. It is about protecting humanity from confusion, contradiction, and doubt. And with that clarity, the believer is finally able to surrender, not anxiously, not conditionally, but with trust. With that foundation in place, let's gather what this doctrine of Ismah ultimately gives the believer, not as abstract theology, but as guidance for the heart. Ismah is divine protection, not the removal of free will. Infallibility safeguards trust in revelation. Certainty depends on a pure chain of guidance. Prophets are fully human and fully reliable. In the next week's episode 25, we will explore perpetuity of punishment, how the Qur'an addresses eternal consequence while preserving divine justice and mercy. Thank you for reflecting with me in this episode. If you found today's discussion meaningful, please consider subscribing, give us a thumbs up, share the episode, and join us in future reflections as we continue to explore the timeless wisdom of al-Mīzān. Until next week, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.